Awakening in the Stone Age. You don't wake up quickly here. There's no alarm clock. No sudden rattle of a phone vibrating against the wood of a nightstand. No streak of artificial blue light burning through your eyelids. Instead, what pulls you gently from sleep is a slow unfurling of awareness, of cold air brushing your cheeks, of distant water drops echoing off stone, of a nearby body shifting against the mat of grass and rushes you share. It's still dark. Not the absolute pitch of midnight, but the dusky gray of the hour before dawn, when the world is holding its breath. The cave is alive in a strange, slow way. Someone is snoring softly to your right. Further away, a baby murmurs in its sleep, the sound fragile and half-swallowed by the thick hide curtain that hangs between sleeping areas. You inhale deeply, and the smells of the Paleolithic world hit you. Smoke from last night's fire, the sharpness of sweat and skin, the faint must of damp stone, and the lingering scent of roasted meat. Your bed is simple, a pile of dried sedge grass and rushes, carefully arranged and trampled soft, though it still scratches at your skin through the fur you use as a blanket. The pelt covering you, thick, a bit matted, probably reindeer, is heavy with years of use. It holds warmth well, but it also carries the weight of generations, faint grease stains, the subtle scent of long-dead animals, the memory of hands that scraped and softened it long ago. You shift slightly. A piece of grass pokes your side, and the sound is like someone crushing dry cereal next to your ear. You ignore it. You're used to discomfort. You're a hunter-gatherer in the Upper Paleolithic, roughly 25,000 years before the age of cities or kings or written words. You don't know that number, of course. You don't think in millennia. You think in seasons, in cycles. In the turn of the sun and the slow swelling of berries on the thorny bush near the forest edge. Right now, it's late spring. The air is cold but not bitter. The cave, a large opening nestled into a limestone ridge above a river valley, traps heat better than the open air, but it still breathes with the rhythms of nature. You can feel the faint breeze sliding along the stone walls, bringing with it the cool dampness of moss and the sound of birds beginning their morning songs far beyond the mouth of the cave. You lie still, letting your body finish waking up. There's no need to rush. There's no breakfast waiting, no schedule beyond the one written into your muscles, your bones, your gut. You will get up when the others get up. You will work when the day calls for it. You will move when the world stirs you. And yet, even here, there is a sense of time. You've lived in this cave for many months now. Your group has used it through 2 winters already, and you know its patterns intimately. You know where the water trickles from the ceiling in spring. You know where the best spot is to sit near the fire without catching smoke in your eyes. You know which patch of moss muffles footsteps, and which flat stone outside the entrance glows first with morning light. You roll onto your back, pulling the hide up around your shoulders, and stare upward into darkness. Somewhere above you, faint white marks dance across the cave ceiling, remnants of soot, ancient handprints, or maybe just mineral stains. They're comforting, like stars on a stone sky. Your body aches, but in a familiar way. The way that comes from walking all day, crouching to dig, lifting bundles of wood, climbing over uneven ground. Your legs are sore. Your feet are rough. But you're alive. And in your world, that's everything. You sit up slowly, stretching your arms above your head. The fur slips from your shoulders, and the cave air rushes in, crisp and cool against your bare skin. Around you, the others begin to stir too. A few quiet grunts. A child coughs once, then curls deeper under a blanket of furs. Someone shifts a bundle of kindling near the central hearth. The fire has gone to coals during the night. Still glowing, still alive, but low. A few wisps of smoke rise from the blackened heart of it. Beside it, a single person sits. Gora, you think, the one who took the last watch. His shoulders are hunched, eyes half closed. He's been feeding the fire with thin sticks and dry moss to keep it from dying. You nod in his direction. He grunts. That's enough for now. You step gingerly onto the cold stone floor. The soles of your feet are like leather, toughened by a life of walking barefoot or in simple leather moccasins, but the chill still bites. You gather your wrap, an old cloak made from stitched elk skins, and drape it over your shoulders, then move toward the hearth. The fire is the center of your world. It gives warmth, light, protection. It dries meat, cures hides, and wards off the dark. Without fire, you die. Every morning begins with fire, and every evening ends by it. It's not sacred in a mystical sense, but it is treated with reverence. You kneel beside the hearth and add a few pieces of dry birch bark, then coax the coals to flare. In a minute, you've got flames again. The light spills outward, licking across stone walls and catching on fur, hair, and gleaming eyes. The cave awakens. Voices remain hushed, but there's movement now. People sitting up, rubbing their eyes, stretching, checking their tools. Someone brings in water from a nearby spring. Another begins preparing breakfast, leftover meat roasted last night, maybe some dried berries or pine nuts if any remain. You dig into your leather pouch, checking your own small collection of items. Your flint knife, a bit of twine, a fire-starting stone, an iron-rich nodule, a bone all for sewing, and a carefully wrapped piece of smoked meat. You eat in silence. This early, no one talks much. You chew slowly, savoring the protein. Meat is precious. Every bit counts. You gnaw the last strip clean and toss the sinew into the refuse pile near the cave wall. Outside, light begins to filter in, soft gold cutting through blue-gray air. A few of the young ones begin to chatter now, full of energy. One crawls over and tugs at your arm. You ruffle his hair and send him back to his mother. She smiles at you with tired eyes. Soon, the day will begin in earnest. But not yet. There's one more task, one more ritual, checking the world. 3 of the elders stand near the mouth of the cave. You join them. Together, you peer out into the waking forest. The trees are tall and still dripping with dew. The mist lingers low, clinging to moss and root. You see nothing yet, but your body tenses with old instincts. You scan for movement, for scent, for sound. The forest is calm today. You exhale and nod. It will be a good day. Into the forest of survival. The cave no longer felt like a womb. It had become a threshold. As the sun rose higher, spilling warm amber light across the forest canopy beyond the cave's mouth, the day pulled at you. You stood with others in your band at the entrance, staring out into the sea of shifting green, the forest. A world filled with promise and peril. A place where you would find everything you needed to live, and everything that could end your life without warning. The air tasted different out here. Inside the cave, the air was stale with smoke, sweat, and ancient stone. Outside, the breeze carried birdsong, damp moss, the faint sweetness of crushed herbs underfoot, and somewhere distant, the scent of something living and watching. You didn't flinch. You had known that scent your entire life. The scent of prey, or predator, or both. You were not alone in this morning ritual. Beside you stood Brun, a quiet man with sharp eyes and a limp from an old boar wound. He carried a long spear, worn smooth from years of hunting. On your other side was Kessa, your cousin's mate, who knew every edible plant within a 2-day walk. She carried a woven pouch across her shoulder, already packed with tools, a bone knife, and a small skin of water. This was the gathering party. Brun would track, Kessa would collect, and you would assist, protect, and learn. Together, the three of you stepped from the shelter of the cave into the morning light, the soft rustle of your leather footwear muffled by the loam beneath your feet. Behind you, the cave shrank away, the voices of children and the cracking of firewood fading until all you heard was the whisper of trees. The forest welcomed you with stillness. Not silence. Nothing in the Paleolithic world was ever truly silent, but stillness. The chirp of birds, the flutter of wings, the buzzing of flies, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, all part of the rhythm of life around you. But underneath it all was an alertness, a tension in the leaves and shadows. You walked softly, respectfully. The forest was alive. It was watching. You followed the same path your people had used for generations. It wasn't marked with signs or carvings, but your feet knew it. The curve of a root here, the smooth dip in the ground there, the smell of crushed ferns in one bend of the trail. These details were passed down in footsteps, not words. No one had ever said, "This is the way." They simply walked, and now you walk too. Brun raised a hand. You stopped. He crouched low, scanning the ground, brushing aside leaves with a practiced flick of his hand. You could barely see what he saw: a broken stalk, a scuffed patch of earth, the faintest line in the soil. But to Brun, it was clear as blood on snow. "Dear," he whispered. His voice was low, reverent. You nodded and watched him place 2 fingers on the ground beside the print, estimating weight, direction, freshness. One adult, not heavy, maybe female, moved east. East meant the stream, and where water flowed, so did life. The decision was wordless. The 3 of you adjusted your packs and turned eastward, weaving through the trees, stepping over gnarled roots and ducking beneath drooping branches. The sun filtered through the high canopy in streaks of pale gold, dancing on your skin and fur clothing. The forest smelled stronger now, green and wet, pulsing with living things. Kessa paused near a fallen log, her eyes scanning the brush. "Hazel," she said softly. You watched as she knelt beside the low shrub and reached into the tangle of leaves. Her fingers moved with delicate certainty, plucking a handful of young hazelnuts just beginning to ripen. She held them up to the light, inspecting them one by one. A few were discarded. The rest went into her pouch. "Not much yet," she murmured. "Another moon and they'll be full." You nodded. You were learning. As the day warmed, the rhythm of movement became almost meditative. You listened not only with your ears, but with your whole body. Every crunch of leaf, every creak of branch, every snap in the distance told a story. Brun's ears twitched at sounds you hadn't noticed, and his shoulders shifted with the tension of a man ready to throw a spear at any moment. It wasn't fear. It was presence. Out here, there was no space for distraction. You didn't think about the past or worry about the future. Your thoughts lived only in the now, where your foot would land next, whether that rustle was squirrel or boar, whether the rising breeze would shift the scent of your sweat toward a predator. You weren't lost in the forest. You were part of it. By mid-morning, you reached the stream. It gurgled quietly between smooth stones, the water clear and cold. You knelt and cupped your hands, drinking deeply. The water tasted of earth and sky. You splashed some on your face, shaking off the dust and sweat of travel. Brun filled a leather water skin. Kessa wandered downstream and returned with handfuls of mint leaves. "Good for breath," she said, chewing one. "Also stomach." You took a leaf and followed her example. The flavor was sharp, cleansing. You swallowed slowly and felt the bitterness settle in your belly like a calming fire. The break was brief. This was not leisure. This was preparation. You crossed the stream on a narrow fallen tree, arms outstretched for balance. On the other side, the forest changed. The trees were older here, beech and ash with wide gray trunks and thick, leafy crowns that blocked much of the light. The ground was soft with fallen nuts and moss. The air was cooler, quieter. Brun stopped suddenly and pointed to the ground. More tracks. Not deer this time. Smaller, more chaotic. Boar, he said, nose wrinkling. Family group, for maybe 5. You scanned the undergrowth with new caution. Boars were dangerous, especially with young. Kessa stayed behind, watching the trees while you and Brun followed the signs. A patch of disturbed soil here. Shredded bark on a tree trunk there. The boars had passed recently, tearing up roots and trampling the ground. But they were gone now. You exhaled and the tension passed. You turned back to join Kessa and found her crouched beside a tree stump, smiling. Wild onions, she said. You grinned. The small white bulbs were pungent, sharp, and incredibly useful. Not only as food, but as medicine. She handed you a handful to clean. You wiped them with moss and wrapped them in leather, stashing them in your pouch. You moved on. Later, the day grew hotter. The sun, though hidden by branches, was high enough now to warm the forest floor. The rhythm slowed. Sweat clung to your back, your arms, your face. Brun removed his outer fur and tied it around his waist. Kessa pulled her scarf back and wiped her brow with a leaf. And then, you heard it. The buzz. Faint. Rhythmic. Growing. Brun tilted his head. Bees. You followed the sound to a tall tree with a hollow midway up its trunk. From the dark hole emerged bees, lazily circling in the summer heat. You saw no sign of threat. Just life. Energy. Honey, Kessa whispered. Brun looked at you. You climb? You nodded. You knew the risks. One wrong move and you could fall. But the reward? Honey. Rich, sweet, calorie dense. A treasure in your world. You removed your outer wrap, tied your pouch securely, and approached the tree. You studied the bark, tested handholds, and began your ascent. The tree was rough and warm under your fingers, its grooves deep from age. You moved steadily, carefully, until you reached the hollow. The hum of bees was louder now. You held your breath. You reached into the hole. Your fingers brushed wax. Sticky. You grasped the comb and slowly pulled. It gave way with a soft tearing sound. You extracted your hand and looked at the golden chunk, glistening in the light, alive with scent and possibility. You dropped it gently to the forest floor. Kessa caught it in a bowl. You reached in again, and again, 3 times. Then you descended, slowly, heart pounding. When your feet touched the ground, Kessa handed you the bowl. The smell, sweet and wild, made your mouth water. You had done well. That afternoon, your group walked slowly back toward the cave, gathering more as you went. Hazel leaves, wild garlic, berries just turning ripe. By the time the cave came into view through the trees, your packs were full and your hands stained with earth and juice. Inside, the others greeted you with nods, grunts, and quiet smiles. The children ran to see what treasures you had brought. The honeycomb earned gasps, the berries cheers, the herbs approving nods from the elders. You sat near the fire, removed your shoes, and stretched your tired legs. The ache was good. You watched as Kessa and others began sorting and preparing the day's haul. The garlic would be cooked with meat, the berries dried over smoke. The nuts cracked open and stored. Nothing wasted. Everything with purpose. You leaned back and let your body relax. Another day survived. And that, in this world, was the greatest success of all. Firelight, fat, and the feast of the ancients. The light had faded when you returned to the cave. Evening in the Paleolithic world was more than a time of day. It was a signal, a shift in rhythm. As soon as the sun began to dip behind the trees and the shadows grew long and sharp, the forest seemed to change. The birds quieted. The wind stilled. The silence thickened. And your band, like so many before you, moved toward the only refuge that truly mattered: fire. The cave welcomed you back with warmth and flickering orange glow. Smoke curled softly near the ceiling, gathering in quiet spirals where sunlight once lingered. You stepped inside and were met with the thick scent of earth, ash, and sweat. But under it all, there was something else, something older, the smell of food. You had returned just in time for the feast. The deer from the previous day had been slowly roasting over the fire, and now its meat had begun to fall from the bone. The fat bubbled softly along the edge of the fire pit, dripping into a stone basin that hissed with each drop. Your stomach tightened with hunger, not the mild, passing hunger of modern life, but the deep, cellular hunger of someone who has truly earned their food. The others were already seated in loose circles around the hearth. Children sat on mats of moss and hide, their faces lit by the flames. Elders leaned forward, watching the meat carefully, sharpening tools or repairing stitching with hands that trembled but never failed. Conversation was low and slow. No one rushed. No one needed to. You joined them, placing your pouch beside the fire and unpacking the day's treasures: garlic bulbs, honeycomb, wild nuts, crushed mint, and a few handfuls of berries. Kessa spread the honeycomb out on a flat stone, and the children gathered to gaze at it, wide-eyed, as if it were a glowing sun pulled from the forest. Brun handed over the onions, which were added to a shallow cooking vessel with coals beneath. This was more than a meal. It was ritual. You watched as Senyu, the oldest among you, lifted a piece of the deer's belly fat and sliced it with a stone blade. His hands were wrinkled and slow, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. He wrapped the fat carefully around a skewer of lean meat and held it over the fire, rotating it slowly, letting the flames render the fat down into the meat itself. Fat was life. In your world, fat was the most precious part of any animal, not discarded but prized. It provided energy when hunting was scarce, kept your body warm in the cold seasons, and could be used in countless ways: for lighting, waterproofing, healing wounds, preserving food. Modern people might fear fat. You cherished it. As the first skewers came off the fire, they were passed from hand to hand, beginning with the children and elders. You waited, as was custom, your hunger gnawing but your patience steady. Finally, a piece reached you, hot, dripping, fragrant. You bit into it slowly. It was incredible. The meat was soft, rich, and smoky. The fat melted in your mouth, coating your tongue in warmth. You chewed slowly, savoring every texture, every memory contained in this simple act. This wasn't just food. It was connection, between hunter and hunted, between labor and reward, between body and spirit. As the feast continued, the mood in the cave changed. People laughed now, low chuckles, light teasing. A child imitated Brun's limping walk, causing a ripple of laughter from the group. Brun rolled his eyes, tossed the boy a bit of gristle, and the child squealed in delight. Someone began humming an old rhythm, not quite a song, but a pattern that had echoed in this cave for countless generations. Across the fire, Kessa sat braiding fibers into a rope, her hands moving with practiced grace. You watched the way her fingers twitched and looped, the way she licked one fingertip before tightening a knot. Even in rest, everyone worked. But it didn't feel like work. There was no separation here between effort and living. You joined her, pulling a pile of nuts toward you and selecting a flat stone. You placed one nut at a time, cracked it gently with a second stone, and picked out the meat with a sliver of bone. The rhythm was satisfying. The sound of cracking shells mixed with fire pops, with laughter, with the distant hoot of an owl outside the cave mouth. This was life. Real life. Later, when the food had been mostly eaten, the bones set aside, and the leftovers wrapped in leaves and stored in cool niches near the back of the cave, you lay back on your mat, stretched your legs toward the fire, and let the warmth wash over you. Your belly was full. Your hands were busy, still sorting herbs. Your eyes half closed as you listened to the gentle click of stone on stone. Someone had started to knap tools for the next hunt. Small flakes chipped away, sharp as glass, falling into a leather catch. Everything was calm. But beneath the calm was readiness. Your people had no cities, no governments, no money. But you had tools. You had memory. You had balance. You had knowledge passed not through books, but through hands and repetition. Senyu had taught you how to tie a perfect sling knot. Brun had shown you how to identify rabbit scat from squirrel. Kessa had whispered which berries soothed pain and which would kill you. This wasn't primitive. This was mastery. The fire crackled. Someone scratched a symbol into the cave wall, not art for beauty, but a mark, a memory, a story that could be read by torchlight long after the voice that told it had fallen silent. A handprint joined others. A red ochre line curled beneath a faded deer. You stared into the flames and imagined tomorrow. Would it bring rain? Would the hunters find game? Would a stranger arrive from a distant band? Would the child in the corner survive his cough? You didn't know. No one did. But it didn't matter. You had fire. You had food. You had each other. And for now, for tonight, that was enough. Bones, smoke, and the memory of tools. The fire had dimmed. Long after the feast, after the stories turned to murmurs and laughter gave way to silence, only the dying embers remained. A red glow pulsed faintly in the center of the hearth like the last heartbeat of a long day. Around it, your people lay curled beneath furs and woven grasses, their bodies rising and falling with breath that matched the cave's quiet rhythm. But you were still awake. Not from discomfort. Your muscles ached, yes, but it was the good ache of work well done. Not from fear, though there was always the awareness of danger outside. But from focus. It was time for tools. You sat cross-legged near the hearth, a flat stone across your lap, a sharp nodule of flint in your left hand, and a smooth antler billet in your right. The firelight danced on the stone's uneven surface. You turned the flint slowly, eyeing the angles. A good tool was never rushed. You struck once, clean, deliberate. A flake slid off, thin and sharp as a blade. You examined it. Then another strike. And another. Each flake removed with intention, each chip a decision. Beside you, Jorik worked silently on a spearhead. His brow furrowed with concentration. He shaved a sliver of wood, testing the fit between shaft and point. His hands moved with the grace of someone whose life depended on precision. Because it did. Here, tools were memory. Not written, not spoken, but felt, passed through hands and time. Every angle, every notch, every groove carried the echo of 1,000 repetitions from those who came before. You weren't inventing. You were remembering. Behind you, a soft noise, a child's cough. You glanced over your shoulder. A small body turned under a fur. His mother stirred, pulled him closer, covered him again. You turned back to your stone. The boy would be fine. He had strong breath, warm skin, and the fire was still alive. You held your flake to the light. Perfect. Thin, curved, and wickedly sharp. This would be your new cutting blade. You placed it carefully into a leather pouch, alongside the others. Some were dull now, chipped from use. You'd grind them down later, turn them into scrapers or arrow barbs. Nothing was wasted. Beside the hearth, the bones from last night's deer sat in a neat pile. Tomorrow, they would be cracked open, marrow scooped out and eaten, the shafts carved into needles, hooks, and awls. The skull might be cleaned, placed near the edge of the cave as tribute or warning, depending on the stories that rose with the morning. You stood slowly and walked to the pile. You selected a long femur, thick and pale. Setting it on a rock, you struck it with a rounded stone. A dull crack echoed through the cave. A second strike. The bone split. Inside, rich, red marrow. Thick as paste. You dipped a stick into it and tasted. Savory. Alive with energy. Your ancestors had known. Long before science gave names to nutrients and calories, they had known. The marrow fed the body in ways muscle could not. It soothed the hungry days. It healed. And so, you scraped more. Then wrapped it in a broad leaf and set it near the fire to warm. Some would eat it raw. Others liked it smoked. Some would rub it on wounds. Your hands were stained, but you felt no need to clean them. In this world, blood and grease weren't dirty. They were sacred. They meant you had lived. As the cave began to cool, you prepared your sleeping space. You rearranged the dry sedge grass, adding a few handfuls of new moss to cushion the stone beneath. You shook out your fur, smoothed the edges, and lay down slowly. Around you, others had already drifted to sleep, some huddled in pairs, others alone but near the warmth of the hearth. You lay back, eyes open, watching shadows on the cave ceiling. Above, you saw the faint patterns of soot and ochre, shapes left behind by your people over generations. Some were handprints. Some were animal shapes, deer, thalkathmam. Some were just lines, but you knew they had meaning. A line could represent a trail, a river, a cycle of the moon, a memory. The fire popped once, sending a brief spark upward. It lit the wall just enough to reveal a single handprint, the smallest one, near the ceiling edge. A child's, left there long ago. You smiled. That child had lived, had eaten, laughed, played, hunted. Perhaps their bones now rested beneath the floor you slept on. Perhaps not, but they had left a mark. You would too. And so, even as your body relaxed into rest, your mind remained sharp. You thought of the spear you would make tomorrow, of the trail Kessa had mentioned, the one near the southern ridge where berries were just starting to grow, of the distant howl of wolves echoing in the valley, too far to worry tonight, but close enough to remember, and of your people, the ones here, the ones gone, the ones yet to come. You weren't alone in your thoughts. All around you, others stirred in their sleep, murmuring, dreaming, shifting. The air was thick with breath and smoke and memory. No gods hovered here. No miracles fell from the sky. But there was warmth. There was fire. There was skill. There was kin. And that, in this world, was everything. The sound of the hunt and the breath of the wind. You awoke not to silence, but to breath. The rhythmic breath of 20 others. The soft hiss of wind curling through the cave mouth. The low murmur of fire rekindled from its ashen heart. The world of the Paleolithic was never still. It whispered, moved, lived around you, even in the quiet. You blinked. Light trickled in through the cave entrance, painting thin gold stripes across the stone floor. Outside, a pale blue sky promised clarity. No fog today. No snow. Just crisp air and a sky that stretched endless above the forest canopy. You sat up, shaking dried moss from your hair, and pulled the heavy fur around your shoulders. Your legs ached, but not deeply. Just enough to remind you that you'd earned your sleep. Today would not be a day of berries or herbs. Today would be a day of blood. The hunting party assembled near the fire in near silence. 4 of you, Brun, still limping but sharp-eyed, Jorik, the quiet one with hands made for shaping spears and skinning hides, Tama, young but fast, already a tracker in his own right, and you. You carried no rank, but your presence meant strength. You were not new. You were not seasoned, but you belonged. No one announced the plan. It didn't need to be said. The cave had been low on meat for 2 days. The dried cuts from the last deer were gone. There were only marrow bones now, and a single pelt drying near the entrance. Hunger didn't drive you, but preparedness did. You never waited to starve. That was a mistake only the dead made. You checked your kit. A long wooden spear, fire-hardened and tipped with flint, wrapped in sinew. A small stone knife, sharper than modern steel. A pouch with dried roots, chewed to calm nerves or dull pain. A sling with 2 river-polished stones. A small roll of deer hide, to wrap around your feet if snow appeared unexpectedly. You tightened your fur wrap and stepped into the light. The forest greeted you with its usual indifference. It did not care that you were hungry. It did not care that your fire still smoked, that your child had a cough, or that your hands bore the cuts of yesterday's tools. The forest had its own rhythms, and you respected them. You walked single file. Brun led, always. His ears twitched like a fox, catching sounds others missed. His eyes, though aging, never lost detail. He could read the bend of grass like others read words. Behind him came Tama, then you, and Jorik last, watching the rear. No one spoke. The hunt was not a time for talk. It was a time for listening. And so you listened. To the scrape of claws in bark, to the sudden hush when birds took flight, to the wind as it shifted and carried scent, musk, dung, pine, rot, rain, to the subtle music of life just out of reach. By midday you found it, tracks in the soft dirt near a slope, fresh, deep, and heavy. Boar. Brun knelt, ran a hand over the edge of a hoof print. He glanced up at you, lips pressed tight. A mother, he whispered, big and young. That meant risk. Boars were dangerous, but a young mother with piglets? More so. They didn't flee. They fought, with teeth like knives and rage like storms. But they were rich with meat and fat, enough to feed the entire band. You nodded once, and the chase began. The next hours were filled with nothing but movement. Fast, careful, footstep by footstep. The boar didn't know it was being hunted yet. You tracked in curves, never straight. You used the wind. You crouched when birds circled. You waited when squirrels chirped in alarm. Every part of the forest had eyes. And when the boar sensed you, it ran. Fast, through underbrush, across stones, between trees that clawed at your skin. The chase was chaos. You gripped your spear so tightly your knuckles bled. Then the sound, the crash of weight through a wall of ferns. The scream of a startled piglet. And Brun yelling, now. It was over in a moment, but you'd remember it forever. The mother turned on Jorik, teeth bared, eyes mad. She charged. His foot caught a root. He fell. You didn't think. You lunged. Your spear struck hard, low in her neck, the sound dull and final. The boar screamed, then staggered and fell. Jorik scrambled back, eyes wide, but safe. Tama threw a stone that struck a piglet running toward him. Another bolted and vanished. And then there was silence. Real silence. The kind that came only after death. The four of you stood around the fallen animal, panting. You looked at your hands, shaking. Brun clapped a hand on your shoulder. Not in celebration, but in approval. You had saved a life. And earned the meat. The work began quickly. You gutted the boar near a rock, collecting the liver, heart, and kidneys, still warm. These would be eaten first, tonight, near the fire. The rest would be skinned, carved, smoked, and shared. Nothing would be wasted. The piglet's blood had mixed with pine needles nearby. The air smelled like copper and sap. It was a sacred smell. You breathed it deeply and wiped your blade on your thigh. The journey back was slow. Your group moved as one now, carrying poles between you, the meat wrapped in hide. The forest watched. You knew it. Vultures circled above, already calling dibs on the scraps. By the time you reached the cave, the sun had slipped behind the hills. Shadows stretched long and cool. But you brought warmth with you. When the others saw the carcass, they cheered, not loud, but with deep joy. The children clapped. The elders smiled. Firewood was added to the flames. And just like that, the work began anew. The heart was roasted first. Kessa cleaned it with herbs and laid it on coals, turning it slowly. The firelight flickered on everyone's faces as the smell of blood and salt and warmth filled the cave. You sat, still coated in mud and blood, your body shaking with fatigue. But inside you, real peace. The kind that only comes after danger and effort and the bond of shared survival. You had risked your life for food, and now you would share it. And tomorrow you would remember the boar, not with stories of fear, but with stories of strength. Fire, teeth, and the circle of blood. The boar was dead, but the night was not safe. Its body had been cleaned. Its heart had been roasted and shared. Fat had been rendered into a stone bowl and set aside to cool. The skin was stretched across a drying frame near the mouth of the cave, still dripping with the memory of the chase. The people were full. The fire was strong. And yet, something wasn't right. You felt it first, not with your ears or eyes, but with your skin. A tension. A stillness outside the cave that did not belong. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace, but from watching. Predators watched this way. You turned your head sharply toward the cave entrance. The trees beyond were black shadows against deep gray sky. The moon was thin, casting almost no light. But the forest was too quiet. Not a bird. Not a rustle. Not even wind. You stepped to the edge of the firelight. Brun was already there. He didn't speak. Just looked at you with the same thought written across his brow. No one panicked. Your people did not fear like modern people do. Fear was a tool. Sharp, cold, useful. You used it now. Brun picked up a burning stick and walked to the perimeter of the cave, drawing a slow, glowing line across the entrance stones. Smoke clung to the air. Kessa took the children farther inside. Elders moved without instruction, gathering tools, weapons, food sacks, all things that might need to be grabbed in the dark. You gripped your spear. Your eyes adjusted. And then you saw it. Not a full shape. Just a flash of silver in the brush. A glint of eyes. Then another. And another. 3, 4, 6. Low shapes shifting just beyond the firelight, waiting, sniffing, calculating. Wolves knew your smell. They feared fire, but not always. Hunger made even careful predators foolish. And the scent of fresh blood was thick tonight. Tama whispered beside you. The fat. You nodded. The rendered fat in the stone basin could be attracting them. You picked it up carefully and moved it toward the back of the cave. A trail of scent followed. You hoped it would draw the wolves away from the entrance, but you knew it wouldn't matter if they charged. Brun raised his spear, and then came the howl. It split the forest like a jagged line of fire. High, long, furious. Not just a call, but a command. The pack surged forward. Chaos followed. The first wolf didn't make it past the fire. It leapt and caught flame on its side. It screamed, crashed sideways into a stone wall, and fled yelping. But the second one was smarter. It darted low, fast, toward the edge of the cave mouth. Brun met it mid-lunge, his spear striking just under the jaw. It thrashed, snapped, caught his wrist, and tore skin before dying. A third came from the side, straight for Tama. You moved. There was no thought, only instinct. You grabbed a burning branch from the fire and drove it straight into the creature's flank. It reeled. You stabbed your spear in, twisted, and pulled free. The wolf collapsed. Blood sprayed your legs. Smoke filled the cave. Children screamed. Another wolf entered, but Kessa was there. Not a warrior, but precise. She slashed with a sharpened bone blade, straight across the throat. The wolf staggered. Jorik finished it. Then it stopped. Just like that, 4 wolves lay dead at the cave mouth. One still twitched. The others had fled into the forest, howling in retreat. Silence returned. Not peace, but silence. You stood there, panting, your spear dripping. Blood, animal, and your own, ran down your arms. A long gash crossed your left hand. You didn't feel it yet. Thomas sat on the floor, his chest heaving, eyes wide. He hadn't been bitten, but he had come close. Too close. Kessa hugged him. Not as a mother, but as kin. The children stared at the wolves, fascinated. One boy reached out to touch the fur. No, Brun growled. Not yet. Now came the second phase of the night. Decision. The wolves were not just a threat, they were a sign. A message. The forest had shifted. Prey was running thin. The balance had tilted. And you had taken too much meat in one place. The pack had followed the scent of blood, yes, but also of movement, noise, smoke. You were no longer invisible in the wild. And you would not be left alone again. Brun gathered the adults. We leave, he said, at first light. No one argued. And so began the preparation. You cleaned wounds by firelight, using moss soaked in hot water and mint. Kessa bound your hand tightly with deer tendon and pine sap. It burned, but it held. Jorik sharpened spears and cut new rope from sinew. Kessa and 2 others packed dried meat, roots, berries, and firestones into bundles. You rolled the furs, gathered the tools, and carried the bones of the boar to a sacred pit just outside the cave. You burned the wolves. Not all of them, but 2. Burning was rare. But when a predator entered your cave, it left more than blood. It left a scar. Smoke carried that memory out. The others would rot where they lay. Food for ravens. Warning to others. You did not sleep. None of you did. You sat in the last hours before dawn, your band gathered around the fire, eyes hollow, hands busy, breath slow. The flames flickered lower, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the stone walls. Kessa told a story, a true one, about a woman long ago whose mate had died defending her from a bear. She had carried his tools for 3 winters before giving them to his son. The sun grew up silent, but his spear never missed. Tama listened closely. So did you? Because in that moment, you were all fragile. And stories gave you form. The sky turned deep blue. You stood, and the world changed again. You would leave the cave today, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Because staying would mean more wolves, more blood, or worse. This was how your people lived. Not in villages, not in stone houses, not in safety, but in flow. Following the wind, following the game, following silence. You took one last look around the cave. The soot marks, the handprints, the smell of smoke and meat and ash. Then you walked out. The forest breathed in your arrival. It would not welcome you, but it would allow you, for a time, into the wild unknown. Dawn didn't rise like a blessing. It rose like a warning. The sky was pale gray, not the soft gray of spring rains, but the heavy kind, bruised and wind-stretched. The fire had gone cold. The wolves were gone. The blood was drying. And now it was time to leave. You stepped outside the cave barefoot, feeling the cold seep into your bones from the earth. No birds sang. No wind stirred the branches. The silence was unnatural, like the land itself was holding its breath. Everyone was ready, bags slung over shoulders, spears sharpened, children wrapped in extra furs and hushed. The sick elder carried on a wooden litter. The dogs, small, half-tamed, paced nervously at the edges of the group, ears flicking, noses raised. You looked back at the cave one last time. The soot, the handprints, the ash, gone. You turned away and walked into the forest. The first few hours were heavy with silence. Not caution, grief. Leaving a cave was more than changing location. It was abandoning a place filled with memory, laughter, blood, birth, warmth. That cave had witnessed births, deaths, the first steps of children and the last breaths of warriors. Now, it was nothing more than stone and shadow. You pushed forward, every step a decision. The group moved in two lines, elders and children in the center, guarded by those still strong. You carried a bundle of fire tools, a hide filled with crushed roots, and a sling with 2 stones tucked against your hip. Your spear bounced against your back with every stride. Brun led. He was limping worse today. Blood loss, maybe. He hadn't said a word since sunrise. You didn't ask. By midday, the forest changed. The trees grew denser. The ground dipped and sloped. Roots rose like ribs from the earth, threatening every footstep. Kessa pointed to mushrooms clinging to bark. Poison, she said simply. But the deer eat them. That meant prey was near. And so were predators. The group slowed. You shifted closer to the children. One of the youngest, a girl named Ira, was crying softly. Her mother bounced her gently as they walked, whispering nonsense songs. You offered the child a dried berry from your pouch. She took it without looking. This was survival, not heroism, just movement, just breath, just the refusal to stop. Near a fallen tree, the party paused to rest. Brun raised a hand. Everyone sank to the ground in silence. You crouched beside Tama, who had taken the rear guard. His face was pale, but he hadn't dropped his spear. He leaned closer. I saw them. You stared at him. Not wolves, he said. Men. Your stomach twisted. Out here, men were more dangerous than beasts. There were other bands. Some friendly, some not. There were no laws, only memory. And memory in these lands was written in broken jaws and burned shelters. Where? You asked. He pointed southeast. Moving parallel. Not close. Not fast. You told Brun. He said nothing, just gripped his spear tighter. The group kept moving, but now faster. That evening, you made camp near a ring of stones beside a river. Not a cave, but shelter. Trees curved overhead like ribs. The fire was rebuilt. The meat was shared. A rotation was decided, 2 awake at all times. You took second watch. The forest was louder here. Frogs, insects, wind in the upper branches. But under that song was a different rhythm, an irregular rustle. A branch snapping. A cough too human. You saw the glint of eyes between the trees. Not wolves. You woke Brun. He stepped forward into the firelight and shouted in the old tongue. Not a challenge, but a question. No answer. Then a voice. From the dark. You smell of blood. Brun answered, we earned it. Another voice laughed. Then silence. And then they left. You heard them moving away. One by one. No weapons drawn. No arrows fired. Just the warning. You didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the group moved again. This time faster. Tighter. You crossed a shallow river and followed a ridge for hours. The children were tired. One boy vomited. Another tripped and bloodied his lip. Still, you moved. And then, finally, before the sun reached its highest point, you found the cliff. And the cave. It wasn't much. Just a crack in the stone, high above a glen filled with fog and elder trees. But it was dry. It was deep. It faced east. It had once been used, long ago. There were bones in the corners. A blackened ceiling. The ghosts of fires long dead. You dropped your bag. Your legs shook. You sat. And you wept. Not loudly. Not from fear. From exhaustion. From hunger. From gratitude. You had made it. You were not safe. Not yet. Not ever. But you were alive. The others moved like a ritual. Fire. Bedding. Water. You skinned what remained of the dried meat and set up a drying rack. You shared what little fat you had. You sang, softly, to keep the children from crying. And that night, as the stars reappeared in a broken sky, you sat beside the new fire and remembered the old one. You were not in the same place, but you were still human. And tomorrow, the forest would test you again. But tonight, you endured. And that was enough. Trial by fire, storm, and spirit. You thought reaching the new cave meant survival. But survival has no finish line. The shelter was good. High up. Hidden. The trees bent around the cliffside like old sentinels, shielding it from wind and eyes. From above, the valley looked like a great green sea, rolling with fog and broken only by the winding black thread of a river. You had fire. You had tools. You had breath in your lungs. And still, it began to fall apart. The first night brought peace. The second night brought fever. The boy, Milan, the one with the cut lip, began shaking before dusk. At first, it was just heat. Then came the rattling breath. His mother pressed moss soaked in river water to his head. Kessa crushed bitter leaves, mixing them into paste and wiping his chest. The fire was fed steadily. Prayers were muttered, not to gods, but to memory. No one had died in weeks. You feared that would change now. You sat outside that night, listening not to wolves, but to coughing. And to wind. The sky was heavy again, bloated with storm. Clouds pulsed with silent lightning beyond the ridgeline. The air felt sharp, metallic, like something waiting to break. By morning, Milan still breathed. But the wind had changed. It came from the north now, cold, cruel, uninvited. You woke to howling trees and stinging rain that slashed sideways across the cliff. Water spilled in sheets from the rocks above. The fire struggled to stay lit, protected by stones and bent backs. Blankets soaked. Roots loosened. And then came the sound no one wanted to hear. Rockfall. A grinding, cracking scream as part of the cliff above gave way, loosened by water, age, and the weight of time. Brun shouted. You ran. The outer wall of the new cave, just a thin ledge, split. A cascade of shale and mud crashed down just meters from where you'd been sleeping. A second later, and it would have buried 2 children. Dust choked the air. Rain pounded harder. People screamed. But no one died. Not yet. The cave was smaller now. Half buried. Half open. You couldn't stay there. Not for long. And so the decision came again. Stay and risk death, or move and risk the unknown. Kessa argued to stay, just until the ground dried. Brun wanted to move, immediately. You stood between them, literally and in meaning. You watched Milan, his eyes open, his skin pale. He couldn't walk. Maybe couldn't last the journey. But if another rock gave way, you made your choice. You spoke. We split. It was the hardest decision you'd ever made. Half the group would stay. Half would scout for better shelter. You would lead the scouting party. Brun would stay behind with the wounded, the weak, the elders, and the fire. You packed light, tools, dried meat, flint, a fur bundle, and water. With you came Jorik, always silent, always dependable. Kessa, reluctantly. And 2 younger hunters, Lar and Dima. Both fast. Both angry that the storm had undone what they'd worked so hard to build. You left Milan behind. His mother wept silently but said nothing. You touched his shoulder before you left. His skin was warm. Too warm. You didn't know if you'd ever see him again. The forest had changed since the storm. Trees bent low, broken limbs scattered. The river had swelled, muddy and fast. Paths had vanished. Familiar markers washed away. It was like entering a world that didn't recognize you. And worse still, there were tracks. Not animal. Not yours. Human. Fresh. At midday, you found the camp. Not yours. The others. A rival band. They had no fire. No children. Just 5 men. 3 shelters. And meat, fresh boar, hanging from a frame of bone and sinew. You crouched in the brush, barely breathing. Kessa whispered, "Do we speak? Or steal?" Jorik said nothing. You made the call, observe. You watched for 2 hours. 1 man limped. Another had a wounded shoulder. They were strong, but stretched thin. Not starving, but not thriving. Like you, they were on edge. You considered risking talk, offering trade. Then you saw it. A necklace. Worn by the biggest man, black hair, scarred chest. The necklace was made of wolf teeth. And 1 human finger bone. You chose silence. You moved on. But not fast enough. One of them followed. You heard him after nightfall, moving through trees, slow, careful, tracking your path like a ghost. You sent Dima to loop behind. The man never saw it coming. Dima's stone cracked his skull from behind. No sound, no scream. He fell, and bled into moss. You did not take his things. You just kept moving. At dawn you found it. A cave, high in a ravine, tucked behind a waterfall. The air inside was dry. The bones on the floor were old, dust dry and cracked. Not a den. Not cursed. You shouted. Birds scattered. But no one came. No predators. No other people. Just silence. And space. Enough for your whole band. You cried. The walk back was hard. Milan was alive, but worse. He coughed blood now. The others were ready. You helped carry the litter yourself. 2 days. Through rain. Through wind. Through shadows. But when you reached the cave behind the waterfall, and lit the fire again, and laid the boy down beside it, he smiled. Just once. Then slept. And still breathed. You had done it. Finn. You had survived. Not because you were strong, but because you chose fire over fear. And now, for a little while, you could rest. Because tomorrow would come. But tonight, you had fire. And fire remembers. Hunger, ash, and the eyes in the dark. The fire no longer crackled with victory. It burned low. Thin. Tired. Like the people gathered around it. The new cave had become home in name only. Its roof didn't leak. Its walls didn't groan. But something had settled into the stone. A weight. A silence. And the hunger had returned. Day 7 since relocation. Milan still breathed. But now he didn't move. His mother fed him broth made from boiled root scrapings and marrow water, barely food. He swallowed it like sleep. Eyes half-lidded. Skin pale gray. You sat near him each morning, waiting for something. A cough. A twitch. A final breath. None came. The real threat waited. Famine. The dried meat had run out. You'd eaten the last strip 2 nights ago, split among 3 children and an elder who could no longer rise. You told them it was enough. You lied. You chewed mint to dull the acid in your belly. It didn't help. The air turned colder. Not winter cold, but close. Birds had begun to vanish. Mushrooms grew, too many. But most were dangerous. Even Kessa hesitated now when she foraged. One mistake meant convulsions. Jorg ate moss once, just to quiet the shaking. No one spoke of the wolves, but everyone dreamed of them. Day 9. You woke to crying. Not a child. A woman. You rushed out, spear in hand. But there was no danger. Just a circle of bodies. Around one body. Brunt. He had not returned from the morning hunt. You found his body at the base of the ridge. Face down. Fingers curled into the dirt. Back torn open. No tracks. Just drag marks. Blood. And what looked like claws. Wolves don't kill without feeding. Bears leave larger wounds. Humans don't leave claw marks. The tribe buried him in the side wall of the cave. No songs. No fire ceremony. Just silence. You sat with your back to the stone that now held him. And sharpened your blade. For hours. That night, the fire flickered strange. You swore you saw eyes in the trees. Not glowing. Just there. Day 11. A deer. Alone. Lars saw it first, limping near the clearing. The tribe had grown too weak to chase. But you and Jorg set out anyway. You tracked it across stone and snowmelt and thorn. When you killed it, throat slit with a flint shard, it didn't even run. It just looked at you. The meat fed everyone. Not much. Not enough. But it warmed the fire. It let you dream. You thought the tide had turned. But then came the ash. Day 14. You smelled it first. High in the air. Not from your fire. From beyond the ravine. You climbed the ridge with Lar. You saw it. Your old cave. Burning. Someone had found it. And torched it. The soot climbed the sky. Not wolves. Humans. Not just destruction. A message. They knew you were near. They didn't want your return. They wanted your memory erased. You said nothing to the tribe. At first. But the children, they saw the black snow falling. That night you took first watch. You sat alone at the cave mouth, staring into dark, listening, and then you saw it. Not light, not shape, movement, silent, smooth, too tall for an animal, too slow for wind. You raised your spear, held your breath. Nothing came. The dark swallowed itself again. You didn't sleep. Day 16. A vote. The people gathered, faces hollow, stomachs tighter than their belts. Jorik, we must leave again. Kessa, to where? The valley is empty. The rivers are rising. The game has fled. They're watching us. No one argued. No one agreed. Silence meant only this. There are no good choices. That evening, Milan coughed. And then he smiled. A weak, broken thing. But it spread like dawn. His mother kissed his forehead. You whispered, if you live, we live. Day 18. The storm returned. But this time it brought snow. Thin. Enough to dust stone. You stepped out that morning and saw them. Tracks. One set. Wolf. Circling the fire. Stopping at the cave. Then vanishing. They didn't attack. They watched. Finn. You made a choice. You packed your tools. Wrapped your feet in fur. Strapped your spear to your back. And walked toward the burned cave. Alone. No one stopped you. No one followed. Until they did. Kessa. Then Jorik. Then Dima. Together, you stood in front of blackened stone. The place that once held your warmth. And now held only scars. Lines. Spirals. And one handprint. Too large to be human. You said nothing. But you knew. It wasn't a warning. It was a claim. Something else had taken the forest. Not man. Not beast. Something older. Something that had always been there. Beneath the trees. In the silence. In the watching. You turned away. Not back to the cave. Not to the valley. To the mountains. To the place no one dared enter. You didn't know what waited. Not food. Not fire. Not sky. Only distance. Only hope. Only the desperate belief that whatever watched from the woods would not follow you into the peaks, because the forest was no longer yours. The mountain beyond memory. You had no map, no trail, no promise, just the wind at your back, howling through stone. The peaks loomed like teeth in the sky, jagged, silent. No human had ever crossed them. Not from your people, not from any story, but stories had failed you. So now, you made your own. You traveled by instinct, by shadow, by fear. Each step higher brought new cold, new aches, new silence. But no watchers, no claw marks, no ash. The forest was gone. Behind you, everything you had ever known. Ahead, nothing, just rock, and your own breath. There were 10 of you left. The sick, the old, the strong, the broken. You walked in a line, no longer talking. Milan was carried in a fur-wrapped sling, his breath weak but steady. His eyes fluttered open at sunrise. He did not speak, but he watched the world like he'd never seen it before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe none of you had. On the 4th day, the wind took your fire. The spark fled in the night. You woke to frost on your lips, your fingers stiff. No one cried. You just moved. One more ridge. One more day. Your skin cracked. Your legs bled. But you moved. Then, on the 7th day, you saw it. A basin. High and hidden. Enclosed by stone. Flat. Sheltered. Filled. And in the center. Not fire. Not burning. Someone was alive here. Or something. You sent Jorik first. He didn't come back. You waited. And then followed. You found him not dead, but kneeling. In front of them. They were not your people. They wore no furs. No bone. They carried no weapons. Their skin was marked with pigment, not for war, but for meaning. Their hair was plaited with feathers, dyed red. Their eyes did not widen when they saw you. They simply watched. And opened their circle. Jorik sat down. You did too. They fed you roots. So they gave Milan something thick and white. He drank it. He slept better that night than ever before. You tried to speak, but they did not answer. They spoke with gesture, with smoke, with rhythm tapped into stone. They did not ask what had chased you. They already knew. One woman, tall, older than time, drew in the ash with a charred stick. A hand, a spiral, an eye. Then she rubbed it out, and drew a fire, a cave, and a line of people walking away. She looked at you, then pointed upward. Day 12. You began to learn their rhythm, their ways. They lived not in dominance, but in balance. They took nothing they could not return. They did not carve into stone. They painted with breath. They did not kill to prove strength. They survived by listening. They feared the watchers, but they were not hunted by them, because they remembered the rules. The old ones. The rules you had broken long ago, when your fire became too big, your noise too loud, your hunts too deep. You stayed one moon, then another. Milan began to walk again. Children learned from children. Kessa sang again. Jorik smiled. You stood each morning on the edge of the basin and looked down into the clouds, knowing that somewhere beyond them lay the burned cave, the dark forest, the spiral carved into stone. But that world was no longer yours. And it never had been. One evening, as the sun dyed violet behind the peaks, the elder woman came again. She painted your face. Then handed you a stone blade. Not to hunt, but to remember. The only word she ever gave you in your own tongue. You were not the first. And you knew. You would not be the last. You turned away from the fire and watched your people sleep, not as survivors, but as something older, something reborn, not cavemen, not wanderers, not prey, keepers.